Edit. A person can leave a place for years and still discover that one unanswered question has been waiting there the whole time. The stagecoach reached Red Creek beneath a hard Arizona sun. Dust rolled behind it in a long, pale cloud, drifting past the feed store, the blacksmith, and the narrow wooden porch outside the saloon. By the time the wheels groaned to a stop, half the street had turned to watch. Then the door opened. Aiyana Red. Ethan Cole reached Red Creek just before sunset. The town had gone gold. Lights stretched across the wooden storefronts, catching dust in the air and turning every window into a sheet of fire. Somewhere inside the saloon, a piano missed the same note twice. Ethan tied his horse outside the hotel. He did not need to ask where Aiyana was. He saw her through the front window. She sat alone near the wall, one hand beside an untouched cup, her traveling coat folded across the chair beside her. For 7 years, Ethan had remembered a girl beside a creek. The woman inside was not that girl. Not exactly. The city had changed the way she carried herself. Straighter, quieter, more deliberate. But the turquoise pendant still rested at her throat. That part remained. Ethan stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots. Aiyana looked up. Neither smiled. Ethan. Aiyana. 7 years disappeared into 2 names. He removed his hat. She noticed the dust on his sleeves. He noticed the faint wear along the edge of her gloves. Then her eyes dropped toward the opening of his shirt. The silver coin rested against the leather cord beneath it. Aiyana went still. You kept it. Ethan glanced down. Seems I did. Her expression softened for half a breath. Then it was gone. Outside, wagon wheels rattled over the street. The silence between them did not feel empty. It felt occupied. By years. By questions. By everything neither had said before she left. Ethan pulled out the chair across from her. Tommy rode hard enough to kill his horse. Aiyana almost smiled. He always did like making news feel important. He said you asked for me. I did. Ethan waited. Aiyana looked toward the window. Across the street, 2 men stood beside the mercantile pretending not to watch. Red Creek had never needed spies. It had neighbors. Aiyana lowered her voice. I need 1 day of your time. Ethan leaned back. That usually means trouble. This time it means an answer. He studied her face. What kind? She touched the turquoise pendant with one thumb. The kind I should have had 7 years ago. Ethan's hand stopped on the brim of his hat. Aiyana stood. She took her leather case from beside the chair. Tomorrow morning. Where? The courthouse. That surprised him. He had expected the hills. Her father's camp. Maybe the old creek. Not the courthouse. Ethan rose. Aiyana. She stopped. He glanced once at the silver coin. Then at her. Why me? For the first time since he entered, something uncertain moved behind her eyes. Not fear. Something closer to memory. She looked at the coin around his neck. Then back at him. Because I need to know whether I was wrong about you. Ethan frowned. Wrong about what? Aiyana opened the hotel door. Evening wind carried dust inside. She stepped onto the porch, then looked back over one shoulder. Tomorrow. The door closed behind her. Ethan remained beside the table. The silver coin felt warm against his chest. And for the first time, he wondered whether Aiyana Red Hawk had returned to ask something of him, or to find out what kind of man he had become. The courthouse was almost empty when Ethan Cole arrived the next morning. Almost. Aiyana Red Hawk stood beside a long pine table near the records room. 3 maps spread beneath her hands. Morning light came through the tall windows and pale bars, catching dust above the floorboards. The room smelled of old paper, lamp oil, and dry wood. Ethan closed the door behind him. You've been here long? Aiyana did not look up. Long enough to learn that paper can lie more politely than people. Ethan stepped closer. The first map was old. Its ink had faded brown with age. A creek curved through the valley in a loose blue line, bending north before crossing the eastern boundary. The second map was newer. Cleaner. Straighter. Different. Ethan leaned over the table. The creek doesn't run there. Not anymore. Aiyana placed one finger on the older line. 10 years ago, after the flood, the water shifted south. Ethan nodded. Everyone in Red Creek remembered that spring. Fences disappeared. Cattle drowned. Whole sections of trail vanished beneath mud. Aiyana slid the third paper toward him. It was not a map. It was a list. Names. Debts. Mortgages. Property claims. Ethan recognized most of them. Miller. Hayes. Dawson. Cole. His jaw tightened. At the top of the page sat one name. Calvin Whitmore. He's been buying the notes? For 8 months. Ethan looked up. Why? Aiyana unfolded another document. Because the railroad surveyors are expected through the valley next year. That changed everything. Land beside a dependable water source was worth little to men driving cattle. It would be worth far more once tracks came through. Ethan looked back at the altered map. Whitmore's newer boundary followed the creek where it ran now, not where the original survey had placed it. If this stands, he controls the spring. And the southern crossing. Aiyana nodded. Eventually, most ranchers in this valley will owe him money or access. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What does your father know? Enough to be angry. That worries me. It should. She folded her arms. Some of our younger men think the ranchers moved the boundary deliberately. And half the ranchers think Apache families are trying to reclaim the creek. Exactly. Ethan stared at the papers. 2 sides. Both afraid. Neither looking at the man standing between them with a ledger. Aiyana's voice dropped. The city taught me something, Ethan. He looked at her. Men like Whitmore don't need to hate my people. A pause. They only need everyone else to. The words settled heavily between them. Outside, hoofbeats sounded on the street. Ethan moved toward the window. A polished carriage had stopped in front of the courthouse. Calvin Whitmore stepped down. Black coat, silver watch chain, boots too clean for Red Creek. He looked toward the courthouse window. Saw Ethan. Saw Aiyana. And smiled. Ethan turned back. What do you need from me? Aiyana gathered the papers slowly. Her confidence changed. Only slightly. But he saw it. You remember. Where the old creek ran. So do 50 other men. 50 other men who owe Whitmore money. Ethan said nothing. Aiyana placed her hand on the oldest map. You knew the surveyor who marked this boundary. My father did. And your ranch still has the original marker stones. Ethan understood. You want me to testify? Aiyana met his eyes. I want the truth on record. Whitmore's footsteps sounded outside the door. Ethan glanced toward it. Then back at her. This is what you came back for. Aiyana held his gaze. No, the answer landed harder than he expected. This is only the part that brought me to the courthouse. The latch began to turn. And Ethan suddenly understood that whatever Aiyana Red Hawk truly wanted from him, she had not told him yet. Edit. Calvin Whitmore entered the courthouse like a man arriving somewhere he already owned. He did not hurry. He did not remove his hat. His black coat carried no trail dust, and the silver chain across his vest caught the morning light as he crossed the floor toward Ethan and Aiyana. Whitmore looked at the maps, then at Aiyana, then at Ethan. Well, his smile was polite. Too polite. Red Creek does make strange company. Aiyana folded the debt list once. Carefully. Whitmore's eyes followed the paper. Not her face. Ethan noticed. So, Whitmore said, the city taught Chief Red Hawk's daughter to read county records. Aiyana met his gaze. It taught me to notice when numbers change after someone gets rich. The smile tightened. Whitmore turned toward Ethan. You should be careful, Cole. About what? About standing too close to other people's problems. Ethan glanced at the old survey map. Looks like this one crosses my fence. Whitmore gave a quiet laugh. That depends which map you believe. Aiyana placed one finger on the original creek line. This one was filed before the flood. And rivers move. Property law doesn't move with them whenever it becomes profitable. For the first time, Whitmore's expression hardened. Only slightly. Then he reached inside his coat and removed a folded paper. He placed it in front of Ethan. Ethan recognized the bank seal immediately. His stomach tightened. Whitmore spoke. Softly. The winter note on your ranch comes due in 6 weeks. Aiyana looked at Ethan. He said nothing. Whitmore continued. Poor cattle prices. Repairs after the storm. Feed costs. He tapped the paper. You've had a difficult year. Ethan's jaw set. What do you want? Nothing unreasonable. Whitmore nodded toward the map. You confirm the present creek as the accepted boundary. I extend your note 3 years. Aiyana remained still. Ethan looked at the bank paper. 3 years. Enough time to rebuild the herd. Enough time to save the ranch his father had worked until his hands could no longer close properly. What if I don't? Whitmore adjusted one glove. The bank may decide patience is no longer profitable. No raised voice. No threat anyone could arrest. Just a sentence. That was how men like Whitmore worked. Aiyana gathered her papers. Ethan looked at her. What exactly do you need from me? She stopped. Your testimony. And if I give it, You tell the truth. That wasn't my question. Aiyana held his eyes. She understood. If he testified, Whitmore could call the loan. If he stayed silent, the altered survey might survive long enough to destroy everyone else. Ethan looked through the window. Beyond the roofs of Red Creek, somewhere past the dry hills, sat his ranch. His father's barn. His mother's cottonwood. 20 years of work resting beneath one man's signature. Aiyana closed the leather case. I won't ask you. Ethan frowned. You came all this way. I came for an answer. Whitmore smiled faintly. There. She understands. Aiyana ignored him. She turned toward the door. Ethan felt the silver coin beneath his shirt, warm against his chest. 7 years ago, it had weighed almost nothing. Now it felt heavier than the ranch. Aiyana. She stopped. He wanted to explain. The debt. The winter. The graves. Everything a man could reasonably be afraid to lose. Instead, he heard himself say, I can't. Aiyana stood still for one breath. Then another. When she looked back, there was no anger in her face. That made it worse. Then I came back for nothing. She walked out. Whitmore remained beside the table. Satisfied, Ethan stared at the closed door. And, for the first time, he wondered whether losing the ranch would tear. By sundown, Red Creek had already changed the story. Aiyana Red Hawk had asked for one man to tell the truth. By evening, people were saying the Apache wanted the whole valley. Nobody knew who started it. That was the trouble with fear. It never needed a name. Outside the feed store, 3 ranchers spoke in low voices. By the mercantile, there were 7. Near Calvin Whitmore's office, 12 men had gathered beneath the lanterns. They want the spring. They'll take the grazing land next. Whitmore says he has papers proving it. Ethan Cole stood across the street and listened. Every sentence carried just enough truth to make the lie useful. The spring mattered. The boundary was disputed, and Whitmore did have papers, just not honest ones. At the southern end of town, Apache riders had begun appearing. 4 at first, then 6. Young men mostly. Silent. Watching. Nobody drew a weapon. But too many hands rested close to belts. A dry wind pushed dust between both groups. Ethan felt the town narrowing around him. Then he saw the boys. Tommy Hayes stood near a water barrel with an Apache child Ethan recognized from the eastern creek. Maybe 9 years old. The two had been rolling a wooden hoop through the dirt. Laughing. For half a minute, they seemed to belong to a different Red Creek. Then Tommy's mother came running. She grabbed his shoulder. Get away from there. At almost the same moment, an Apache elder stepped forward and pulled the other boy back. Neither child understood. Their faces said that much. One went west. One went east. The wooden hoop fell between them. It rolled in a slow circle, then dropped flat in the dust. Ethan stared at it. That image followed him all the way home. Night had settled over the ranch when he entered the house. No lamp was burning. No voice waited for him. Only the familiar smell of cedar, leather, and old ash. He lit one wick. The flame revealed the table. His father's chair. The walls he had been so afraid to lose. Ethan reached beneath his shirt and pulled out the silver coin. 7 years ago, Aiyana had placed it in his palm beside the creek. Tonight it felt accusing. Then his eyes moved toward the cedar chest beneath the window. His father's things. Ethan had not opened it since the funeral. The hinges resisted, then groaned. Inside lay old cattle receipts, tax papers, a broken compass, 2 letters in his mother's handwriting. Ethan moved them carefully. At the bottom was a narrow leather notebook. He stopped breathing for a second. He knew it. His father had carried that notebook whenever he rode with the old surveyor. Ethan opened it. Measurements filled the pages. Fence lines, marker stones, creek bends, dates. Then he found the year of the flood. A hand-drawn boundary crossed the paper in faded pencil. The old creek. The original markers. Everything Whitmore's new survey had erased. Ethan sat back slowly. The silver coin slipped from his fingers. It landed directly on the page. Memory beside proof. For a long time, Ethan only stared. Nothing had become easier. Whitmore still held his debt. The ranch could still be lost. But now silence would require something worse than fear. It would require pretending he had never seen the truth. Ethan closed the notebook. Outside, thunder rolled beyond the desert hills. He reached for his coat, then his hat. And when Ethan Cole rode back toward Red Creek, he carried no argument with him. Only his father's handwriting. The rain reached Red Creek before Ethan Cole did. By the time he tied his horse behind the hotel, Water was running from the brim of his hat and turning the street dust into dark mud beneath his boots. He carried the leather notebook under his coat. Dry, protected. Aiyana Red Hawk opened her door after the second knock. She looked at him, then at the notebook in his hand. You found something. Ethan stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of lamp oil and wet wool. Her maps still covered the table near the window. He placed the notebook beside them. My father's. Aiyana opened it. The first pages meant little. Feed counts, fence repairs, distances. Then she reached the flood year. Her eyes slowed. Ethan watched her follow the pencil line across the page. The old creek, the marker stones, the boundary before the water moved. Aiyana looked up. This proves the newer survey is false. It proves enough. You know what happens if you testify. Ethan removed his wet hat. Whitmore calls the note. You could lose the ranch. I know. Aiyana closed the notebook. For a moment, rain filled the silence between them. Ethan leaned one hand on the table. I'll do it. She studied him carefully. Why? Because I saw what one lie did in a single afternoon. He thought of Tommy, the Apache boy, the wooden hoop lying in the dust. And because knowing the truth makes silence harder. Aiyana's expression changed. Not relief. Something deeper. Then she reached for her leather case. You should see this. She opened it. 3 folded packets rested inside. Each sealed. Each addressed. Ethan frowned. What are those? Copies. Of what? Whitmore's altered filings. Debt transfers. Survey discrepancies. Ethan looked at her. I sent them before I left Tucson. The room seemed to shift. You already had the evidence? Enough to bring territorial attention. Enough to stop him. Eventually, Ethan stared at the documents. Then at her. You never needed me to save this. Aiyana's eyes hardened. No. The answer came without hesitation. I did not come home looking for a savior. Ethan felt foolish for ever thinking otherwise. Then why my testimony? Because paper from Tucson can begin an investigation. She touched his father's notebook. But people here trust what they remember before they trust what arrives with a seal. Ethan nodded slowly. That made sense. But not enough. He stepped closer. You told me you came back for an answer. Aiyana was quiet. Outside, thunder rolled beyond the hotel walls. What answer? She looked at the silver coin beneath his shirt. Then at him. I needed to know whether the man I remembered was real. Ethan went still. That's why you came back. Partly. Aiyana looked toward the rain-streaked window. 7 years is a long time to trust a memory. Ethan wanted to ask what else she had remembered. What else had brought her back? But hoofbeats sounded below. Several horses. Then more. A man shouted from the street. Cole. Ethan moved to the window. Calvin Whitmore stood beneath. The rain with 6 ranchers behind him. Across the far end of the street, Apache riders were beginning to appear. Aiyana came beside Ethan. Neither side knew about the notebook. Neither side knew about the sealed evidence. They only knew fear. And fear had arrived first. Ethan looked at Aiyana. Tomorrow morning. She nodded. The courthouse. He picked up his father's notebook. Below them, the 2 sides stared across the rain-dark street. No one moved. Not yet. But by sunrise, Red Creek would have to decide whether it wanted a fight or the truth. Calvin Whitmore called Ethan Cole's name twice from the street. Ethan never went down. That mattered. So did what happened next. Sheriff Owen Briggs arrived before either side found a reason to move closer. He stood beneath the rain with both hands visible and told the ranchers to go home. Then he turned toward the Apache riders. Morning, he said. Courthouse. No speeches. No threats. Just one night for fear to cool. By sunrise, Red Creek had doubled the crowd. Ranchers filled one side of the courthouse. Apache elders and families filled the other. Wet coats steamed near the stove. Mud darkened the floorboards. The room smelled of leather, damp wool, old paper, and too many people holding their breath. Ethan entered beside Aiyana. Every eye followed them. Whitmore stood near the front with a lawyer from Tucson. Chief Red Hawk sat 3 rows behind Aiyana. He did not call to his daughter. She did not look back. The hearing began with a territorial land agent seated behind the clerk's table. Sheriff Briggs remained by the door. That was where his authority belonged, keeping men from turning documents into blood. Whitmore's lawyer spoke first. He talked about current water channels, recorded debt, property rights. Everything sounded clean when spoken slowly enough. Then Whitmore stood. This is not about Apache land or ranch land. His gaze moved across the room. It is about lawful ownership. Aiyana's face remained still. Ethan felt the silver coin beneath his shirt. The land agent looked toward him. Mr. Cole. Ethan rose. The room changed. Not loudly. Just enough. He walked to the front table. Whitmore smiled. You know where the creek runs today? Ethan looked at him. Yes. And you know which map reflects that? Yes. Several ranchers shifted behind him. Whitmore's smile widened. Ethan reached toward his gun belt. Sheriff Briggs straightened. So did 3 men near the wall. Ethan slowly removed the revolver. He placed it on the table. The wooden surface gave a single hard knock. Then Ethan opened his coat and placed his father's leather notebook beside it. One of these can make a man afraid. He rested his hand on the notebook. The other can prove him wrong. Nobody moved. Ethan opened to the flood year. He read the measurements. Marker stone to cottonwood. Cottonwood to limestone shelf. Limestone shelf to the original creek bend. Dates. Distances. Names. Whitmore's lawyer objected. The land agent held up one hand. Let him finish. Ethan did. Then Thomas Bell's former deputy surveyor was called forward. An old man with a stiff back and trembling fingers. He examined the handwriting. That's Cole's father. He turned the page. And those are Bell's field measurements. A rancher stood from the rear bench. I remember that limestone shelf. An Apache elder rose across the aisle. So do I. Another voice followed. Then another. One memory became 3. 3 became 7. Whitmore tried to interrupt. The room no longer belonged to him. A widow named Eleanor Hayes confirmed the flood had moved the creek after the original boundary was marked. A rancher admitted Whitmore had offered to extend his debt if he supported the newer survey. Then another man admitted the same. The land agent gathered the documents slowly. The disputed claim is stayed pending territorial review. Whitmore's face lost color. No one cheered. That was what Ethan remembered most. No victory cry. No fists raised. Just a room full of people realizing they had nearly hated each other for a lie that benefited one man. Ethan turned toward Aiyana. She was watching him. Not surprised. Not relieved. Certain. He stepped closer. You already had enough to start this. Yes. Then why did you need me? Aiyana looked at the notebook. Then at the revolver still lying beside it. Because evidence could. Tell me what Whitmore was. Her eyes rose to Ethan. It couldn't tell me what you were. And this time, Ethan understood that the hearing had never been the only judgment taking place. The courthouse emptied slowly. Not because anyone wanted to stay. Because people needed time to understand what had almost happened. Ranchers stepped into the morning light without looking toward the Apache families beside them. Apache elders gathered quietly near the courthouse steps. No one celebrated. No one shouted after Calvin Whitmore when he left. He walked alone toward his carriage with mud on his polished boots and no one offering to open the door. Ethan Cole watched from inside. His revolver still rested on the table. So did his father's notebook. Aiyana stood near the window. For several seconds, neither spoke. Outside, Red Creek began moving again. A wagon creaked past. Someone reopened the feed store. A child laughed somewhere beyond the boardwalk. The ordinary sounds felt strange after so much silence. Ethan picked up the revolver. Then the notebook. You knew the territorial office would investigate. Aiyana nodded. Yes. You knew Whitmore's survey wouldn't survive forever. Yes. Ethan looked at her. Then you never needed me to stop him. Aiyana turned from the window. I told you that. No, he stepped closer. You told me you didn't need saving. A pause. That isn't the same thing. Aiyana studied his face. Ethan felt the silver coin beneath his shirt. 7 years. One unanswered question. He finally understood that every map, every document, every mile she had traveled from Tucson had only brought them back to something older. Why did you really come home? Aiyana looked outside again. Chief Red Hawk stood across the street beside 2 elders. Her eyes followed him. When I left, people told me the city would change what I was. Did it? It tried. Her voice remained calm. The city liked me best when I spoke like them. She touched the turquoise pendant at her throat. Red Creek liked me best when I stayed where people expected an Apache woman to stay. Ethan said nothing. Aiyana continued. In Tucson, some people thought education meant I should become less like my father. She glanced toward the street. Here, some people thought education meant I had become less Apache. Her mouth tightened slightly. Everyone wanted me to choose which part of myself made them comfortable. Ethan leaned against the table. And I didn't. Aiyana looked at him. 7 years ago, you never asked me to choose. The words landed quietly. That made them heavier. You listened when I spoke about my father. A pause. You listened when I spoke about leaving. Another. You never acted like one meant betraying the other. Ethan lowered his eyes. He remembered the creek. A younger Aiyana sitting beside him beneath the cottonwoods. Talking about Tucson as if it were another country. Talking about home as if she were already afraid of losing it. You came back to see if I remembered? No, Aiyana stepped closer. I came back to see if the man I remembered was real. Ethan met her eyes, and her expression softened. You were afraid. He almost smiled. That isn't much of an answer. It is. She looked toward his father's notebook. You nearly chose the ranch. I did choose it. For a while. Ethan said nothing. Aiyana's voice dropped. I did not need a man who was never afraid. She held his gaze. I needed to know whether one man could be afraid of losing everything and still refuse to take what was not his. The room seemed very quiet. Ethan finally understood. That was what she had wanted. Not protection. Not permission. Not a cowboy willing to fight for her. Proof. Proof that somewhere between Apache land and Red Creek, there was still one person who could see all of her without asking her to become less. Ethan touched the silver coin. Aiyana noticed. And there was one other reason. He looked at her. What reason? For the first time that morning, Aiyana smiled. Small. Private. Almost dangerous. She moved toward the doorway. Ethan followed her with his eyes. Aiyana. She stopped. You're going to leave me with that? She glanced back. 7 years seemed long enough for one unanswered question. Then she stepped into the sunlight. Ethan remained beside the table, the silver coin warm against his chest. And this time, he knew she had not returned because she needed somewhere to belong. She had returned to discover whether there was still one place where she would not have to choose who she was. 3 months later, the missing fence rail was still gone. Ethan Cole had meant to replace it. At first. Then the north trough cracked. A winter storm tore shingles from the barn. 2 calves came early. The bank sent another letter about the ranch note. Life had a way of making symbols look accidental. Still, Ethan never fixed the rail. By then, Calvin Whitmore had left Red Creek. The territorial investigation froze his disputed claims. 2 ranchers testified about the debt offers. An old clerk in Tucson produced copies of altered filings. Nobody dragged Whitmore from town. Nobody fired a shot. He simply climbed into his carriage one gray morning and discovered that fewer people were willing to look him in the eye. Sometimes that was enough. Ethan kept the ranch. Not all of it. The corrected survey cost him a strip of land along the eastern creek, exactly where his father's notebook said the boundary belonged. The debt did not disappear either. Ethan still paid it each month. But once Whitmore's land dealings came under investigation, the bank lost its appetite for forcing the ranch into foreclosure. So Ethan worked, paid what he owed, mended what broke, and watched Red Creek become ordinary again. That was the part nobody would have believed 3 months earlier. Ranchers watered cattle beside Apache families. Children crossed the shallow creek without adults calling them back. Some people still stared. Some always would, but fewer every week. Late one afternoon, Ethan was repairing a gate hinge when he heard a single horse approaching through the cottonwoods. He looked up. Aiyana Red Hawk rode toward him. No stagecoach. No city coat. Just a dark riding skirt, weathered boots, and the turquoise pendant catching the last amber light. Ethan set down the hammer. Took you long enough. Aiyana dismounted. You were waiting? Wouldn't admit it under oath. That earned him a small smile. She walked past him toward the eastern fence. Ethan followed. They stopped at the missing rail. Beyond it, the creek moved quietly over pale stones. Tommy Hayes stood knee-deep in the water, helping the same Apache boy steady a clay jar against the current. Neither seemed interested in who owned which bank. Aiyana touched the empty brackets. You never repaired this. Ethan leaned against the post. Didn't seem necessary. Your cattle agree? They've learned diplomacy. This time she laughed. Softly. The sound stayed with him longer than it should have. Aiyana looked toward the creek. My father says agreements between frightened people don't last. He's probably right. She turned. That doesn't bother you? Ethan looked at the fence. Everything breaks eventually. He tapped the weathered post. Doesn't mean you stop building. Aiyana was quiet. Then her eyes dropped to the silver coin beneath his shirt. She stepped closer. Ethan did not move. Her fingers lifted the leather cord. For a moment, neither of them stood beside a fence in Red Creek. They were younger again. beside a summer creek, before Tucson, before Whitmore, before either of them knew how expensive truth could become. Aiyana lifted the coin over Ethan's head. He watched it fall into her palm. So that's it. She studied the worn silver. No, from her pocket. She drew a new leather cord, stronger than the old one. She threaded the coin through it and placed it back into Ethan's hand. Now you can keep it. Ethan closed his fingers around the coin. You figured out what home means? Aiyana looked toward the Apache hills, then toward Red Creek. Finally, back at him. I figured out home is the place where nobody asks you to become smaller before they let you stay. Ethan said nothing. There was nothing useful to add. Aiyana glanced at the missing rail. You asked about the other reason. Ethan's eyes met hers. I remember. She stepped through the opening, stopped beside him, then looked toward the two boys laughing in the creek. I wanted to know if there was still one place in this valley where I wouldn't have to choose which half of myself belonged. Ethan looked at her, and Aiyana's eyes softened. I found it. No kiss. No promise. No cheering crowd. Just two people standing beside an unfinished fence while the sun lowered over water that no longer belonged to fear. Behind them, one rail remained missing. Not broken. Not forgotten. Simply open. And sometimes, out west, an opening was worth more than a boundary.